Kenny will be talking about weather impacts to ZKC Airspace, how CWSUs play an intricate part in FAA's air traffic control.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And, my motivation behind this was, I've been in the weather service now almost 18 years. And, I knew a little bit about CWSUs and what they do. And I've been in the ZKC for about a year and a half. And I did this talk back in March at the Thunderstorms and Doppler Radar Conference up in Des Moines. It's my old stomping grounds. I was in the WFO for about 15 years. And so kind of tailored it to their, to Iowa centric there. But I wanted to really show it, display how CWSUs do play a huge role in where air traffic goes across the NAS. And so weather does play a huge impact to type of, for delays across the, this is based off your core 30 airports. Just over 60%. And this is just from fiscal year 2022. Even pre-pandemic, it was up closer to 70%. So, and, some of you may already knew why there are CWSUs. I didn't know that, when I first got into the weather service, but, the catalyst was a crash, unfortunately, of Southern Airways Flight 242. They were en route to Atlanta, and unfortunately, they flew into a hailstorm. Both engines flamed out, and 63 fatalities, 22 survivors. But the NTSB suggested that air traffic controllers needed a better way to receive timely weather information. So lo and behold, back in the late 70s, there it was the birth of ICE as we know it today. So, so what we do, we provide weather support and consultation to the FAA air traffic managers and controllers. And so we're not 24 hours. We basically are open from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. And I'll show the reason why on that in just a second. But as far as, where they reroute air traffic around hazards, that's a lot of the forecast that we provide them, the weather support that we provide them is the reason why they're doing what they're doing. So we have a pretty powerful impact on where air traffic is going to go. And so if you're actually flying, this summer in the wintertime or things like that, your delays may be because of CWSU forecasters. So you can thank us, I guess. So, so the peak operational time in the NAS is roughly about 15 Zulu to about 22 Zulu in the afternoon. And you really can expand that to, maybe about 8, 9 in the morning to about 7, 8 o'clock at night. But so we operate from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. During the day. So there's not a whole lot of flights during the overnight hours. But during these peak operational times, you can see about 5,000 flights on average in the NAS at one time. So it's pretty, it can be pretty busy at times, especially when you throw in some thunderstorm activity. And, pretty much every day in the NAS, there's about 45,000 flights and almost 3 million airline passengers. So there's a pretty big impact to IDSS, back to the whole, protection of life and property. So that's very important to the FAA as well. So we've, we're really aligned to that safety aspect. So, and where we're at, we're fully embedded within the FAA air traffic control centers. So there's 21 of the centers across the NAS that cover the NAS. And we also provide support to TRACONs, the terminal approaches, and that's the ones we provide to are MCI and T75, which is St. Louis. And then some of the airports within our airspace receive our pre-duty weather briefing, but there's over 500 airport towers across the nation too. So here's a breakdown of the airspace across the NAS. Again, we're flyover country. Nobody really wants to come to Kansas City or St. Louis, but unless you're a Chiefs fan, I guess. But there's always air traffic going somewhere to Denver, Dallas, Chicago, Minneapolis. Memphis is a very busy airport as well. So we're surrounded by very busy terminals. And so, when a WFO is really busy, you ramp up when it actually, weather is actually going through your CWA in your counties, where it's really just the opposite for CWSUs. We want to know what's going on outside of our airspace, because that's going to push all the air traffic into our airspace and make more havoc on the controllers and things like that. And so that's where we're always in tune to, other terminals such as Chicago, Dallas, Denver, in Memphis and Minneapolis. So we have 5 of the top 10 busiest airports in the NAS, surrounding us. And so we have all the approaches and departures coming in our airspace at one time or another throughout the day. So it's very important that we kind of keep in tune to that as well. And we've coordinated with the surrounding CWSUs as well as what they're thinking on that. So a little bit more breakdown in our airspace. We have 6 areas that this is kind of, I guess, broken down to like, your counties, so to speak, but up in the atmosphere. And even those are broken up into low altitude, high altitude, and super high altitude airspaces. And you can see the thick black line there is the high altitude and super high altitude, but they're a little bit different from the low altitude. So even when we're providing a DSS to Flint Hills, we got to keep in mind too that they also go into Southwest Missouri if it's low level wind shear, things like that we're trying to provide them with some service. So it can be very complex situation at times. So who receives our briefings? We do once a shift, we do a stand up to all the folks here, pretty much on the left there, and then we also do a pre-duty weather briefing, which is a recording that goes out to all the controllers, and all the controllers are required to view that before they go on shift. And then we sit right next to the OMIC, which is the operations manager in charge, and these folks they're the leaders, and they pretty much run the entire building, and everything goes through them, whether it's weather information or some sort of equipment issue, things like that. And so they're always wanting to they rely on us very heavily on weather information, so it's one less thing that they have to worry about. There's basically yes or no, is it going to happen kind of thing. So and our biggest customer basically is the TMU, the traffic management unit, and the supervisor there, traffic management coordinator. So we do a briefing with them, organized briefing twice a day, but then we update them constantly if there's changes in thunderstorm activity, or if we're looking at new development on thunderstorms, or if there's going to be a break in the line, things like that. And then the OS, the operations supervisor, those are the folks that run each of the areas here that you can see, and they'll come in for a little briefing before they start their shift as well. So on a given day, a weekday in the morning, if there's busy weather, we can give up to a dozen to maybe 15 different briefings at times. So it can be very, very busy on those days. So one of the things we do provide is called an Icing Assist. And I know this is summertime coming up, but we typically provide these in the winter, especially when there's like a stratus deck, covering much of the airspace. And really, we provide them the controller or the operations supervisor just a helpful area where there might be a break in the clouds. It's a situation where there's an aircraft that's caught in an icing situation, and a lot of the times it's a VFR rated, but they're not IFR rated to fly through that stratus. So we try and find them the nearest airport that's VFR. We try and get them into a hole or where there's break in the clouds, or trying to get them above the freezing, above the stratus deck to kind of get them out of that icing situation. So it can be a very bad situation for icing. We had an aircraft, a single prop aircraft back in February, I believe it was, where she reported a ½ inch of ice on her wings. And the thing that saved her was the propeller was heated, so it didn't accumulate any ice. But it was one of those situations that we were lucky to provide her with a good service to get her to safety. So pilot reports are extremely important to us. This is your local storm report, but up in the atmosphere. And typically when we have icing or turbulence forecast, the controllers are required to get at least one report per hour from aircraft in their airspace. And so even if it's a nil report, we'll take it. Like if we're forecasting turbulence at 35,000 feet, but they're getting tons of smooth rides, that's something that we can take out and fine tune our forecast. So and so one of the importance of is a good example of an importance of PIREPs here. We had an MCS rolling across the southern part of our airspace last May, and this was early in the morning, so it was really kind of before air traffic was getting going. But we started getting some PIREPs there of some moderate to severe turbulence. It wasn't your small aircraft, because sometimes the turbulence PIREPs could be somewhat subjective, depending on the aircraft, depending on the pilot, that kind of thing. It's it's like local storm reports. You kind of take them with a grain of salt a little bit, but we were getting several reports there of moderate to severe turbulence from Boeing 767, so big aircraft, and so that was where the amble blow off is just basically producing these rumble strips up in the atmosphere, just causing some nasty turbulence, and so one of the only products that we issue at CWSU is the Center Weather Advisory, and so it's basically like our warning. So I threw this out to cover that moderate to severe turbulence, and coordinate with Aviation Weather Center, and they ended up issuing a segment later on. They issued theirs at the top of the hour, so you can see this was right after 13Z where it was issued. So importance of TAFS. We have roughly about 40 TAFS in our airspace that we typically try to monitor. We'll work with Pleasant Hill and St. Louis on their TAFS at St. Louis and MCI. And sometimes we'll work with Wichita and Topeka as well, depending on the weather and situation. But, the importance of TAFS is, amend as needed if you see something's changing and something's changing quicker than your forecast or whatever it may be. It's definitely important to keep those TAFs fresh and updated to the best forecast you could possibly give, because there's an impact to specifically to the NAS, but it's for the smaller aircraft as well. So kind of goes back to that icing situation. If you have VFR conditions forecast, but they're not happening at the moment, and it might be or the other way around kind of thing. So thunderstorms, we're in thunderstorm season. This is one of the main FAA concerns, especially from springtime through into the mid portions of the fall. And I'll talk a little bit about a product that we issue here in a second, but they want to know timing, initiation, dissipation, if it's going to impact any terminals, the coverage as far as widely scattered versus, big old solid line, echo taps. So can the aircraft get over these thunderstorms? And then if there's going to be any holes, or if it's going to be filling in over the next, few hours. So there's a lot that goes into the FAA and the DSS that we provide them with the thunderstorm activity. So there'll be the days that I'll be in the TMU, dozens of times, just kind of chatting with them and picking their brain and helping them provide, to get the aircraft where they need to be to avoid these thunderstorms. So this is where the TCF comes in handy. This is the Traffic Flow Management Convective Forecast. So it's an acronym within an acronym. So, being a government agency, we love those acronyms. But this is an Aviation Weather Center product, but we do coordinate with CWSUs and also other airlines and the FAA Command Center. And, we'll coordinate every 1 to 2 hours in a whiteboard chat room where we can draw what our thinking is as far as coverage, height, and confidence levels for the thunderstorm outlook. And so it's a 4 to 6 and 8 hour product. And the FAA decision makers use this pretty much almost down to a T as far as, where they're going to put playbooks and mitigation strategies throughout the NAS. So it's a very important product that we issue for the NAS and the FAA. So here's an example. This is from April 20th last month. If you remember, it's big old squall line extended from pretty much south of Chicago all the way into northeast Texas. And this purple line, they're very rare. I think actually this year we've actually issued 3, I think, but But even before this, they're pretty rare occurrence. But basically, nothing's getting through that solid line, so they got to put playbooks either north or south of this line. And so it was a very interesting day as far as air traffic, and the confidence on this was pretty high confidence. So some examples of some playbooks here. I found this in one of our manuals in CWSU. But the playbooks haven't really changed. I mean, they use, it's basically just taking, your air traffic markets from one to another. So this is basically your East Coast market, your New York, Boston, DC markets going out to the East Coast, or excuse me, West Coast. And the black blob there is thunderstorms. So you can see just a little bit of a tweak and difference where the location of those thunderstorms are. It's going to make just a bigger impact as far as where they're going to put the air routes through. So here's an example I captured from last May from the New York, DC markets and going out just to Denver. And so you can see which route, was probably preferred for the airline. So they wanted to take the southern route right through ZKC. And so looking at radar, there was a little bit of a gap, through north central Kansas there. So any route from going up through to Minneapolis, they were going to take that. But most of the traffic was going west to east there, east to west across southern Kansas, southern Missouri. And I did a little screen capture of FlightAware. If you've ever been on FlightAware, it's a pretty cool website. But this was, you can see where all the air traffic was going across that area. So it was just causing a bigger impact for those controllers. And again, the controllers up in northeast and trails and north central portions of airspace, they had thunderstorms in there, so they hardly had any air traffic in their airspace. So on to PDARS data. Excuse me for a sec. This is Performance Data Analysis and Reporting System, yet another acronym. But this is a joint effort from the FAA and NASA. I believe it started in 1997. But it's a way to collect flight data and radar track data from all the ARTCCs, TRACONs, and ATCTs across the NAS. And so it's a pretty powerful program. And it's basically a way to measure the controllers, how they're delivering services and making sure that they're providing the best service they possibly can to the customers, which is, the pilots of the aircraft, but essentially to the folks that are riding in that aircraft, because they want to, make sure that everybody's getting to their location safely. And so, I've done multiple, after action reviews and, service assessments. So this is kind of a way for the FAA to do that same thing, but on a kind of a daily basis or weekly basis kind of thing. So here's an example. Had to throw in a little bit of Chiefs stuff here. This is the AFC Championship Game against the Bungles. Let's see here. We'll speed it up here. But this is just an example without any weather, how busy it can be was just based on one big event like the AFC Championship Game. MKC is the one in the middle. Most of the red was going towards MKC, but there was some other traffic too to deal with on some of these other smaller airports. Even MCI was getting a little busy too. So, but they were having trouble where to actually park some of these aircraft too, because there's only so much space down there in MKC. But one thing we did learn about this is there's a lot of people that there's a lot of rich people that have their own airplanes. So it's pretty amazing. All right, one event that's kind of dear to my heart. This was December derecho of 2021. This was the last actual big severe weather event that I worked at WFO Des Moines before I moved down here to ZKC. But pointing this out, this was a huge impact for folks on the surface. Covered multiple states, hundreds of miles of damage. So in tons of WFOs, issuing warnings and ramping up, things like that. So, and the PDARS data for this event, there's no radar data in this. For some reason, it wasn't working, but he provided the EchoTOPS, which is the 500 there, which is 50,000 feet and 45,000 feet. but you can see where the actual line extended south. It really caused a significant diversions there as time went on. And really, when the playbook, when our forecast, the TCF forecast is, just a little bit off, it still, may cause some major diversions there, especially across southern Kansas into northern Oklahoma there. It's really caused a big cluster. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about, some of the restrictions or some of the restrictions on the airspace as far as, how many aircraft they want in certain airspaces. Let's see, move on. There we go. All right. So a little bit of a controller tidbits before I go on to the next little bit of events here. Is just, similar to a WFO as far as warning ops, you have one radar guy or gal issuing the warnings, but you can also have a warning 2 operator. So, so in a controller situation, you had actually, two operators helping out, and then maybe add on an A side, which is an assistant controller. So sometimes maybe even up to 3 controllers working one sector, which can be pretty busy. So, and typically you have at least 2 transmissions between a controller and a pilot, but sometimes their aircraft is just kind of touching the airspace, kind of barely even, but they still have to monitor that aircraft no matter what, if it's in the airspace or not. So, and then the separation is 5 nautical miles and 1,000 feet. So on to from March 5th of 2022, if you remember, this was the Winterset, Iowa EF4 tornadoes. Was a big impact event there for central Iowa. But it was also a big impact too for ZKC Airspace. And this was my first big event too, as far as working in the CWSU and related to thunderstorms. And so it was kind of a big eye opener, kind of I guess breaking in as far as working with convection and aviation. And this was, your typical load developing out of the ejecting out of the Rockies, deepening as it moves across the plains, and dragging that cold front and dry line across and causing a huge squall line down south through Kansas into western Missouri. So, and one thing I haven't mentioned yet is, the TMU traffic management, they also look at the upper level jet and where they're going to, so that kind of helps favor where air traffic is going to go, especially the transcontinental ones. So they were favoring ZKC airspace already because they want to get, they want to get there faster, save time, save money on fuel, things like that. I've seen, airlines up to like 600 knots, catching a jet. It's just pretty impressive when they catch that. And so, obviously going against that, it's going to be a lot slower, but so they were already favored our airspace on that day. So that was one thing that, one caveat too that had to throw in there. For the airspace sectors, there's also, again, we have the areas broken up. There's the 6 areas, but then in each area, there's all these sectors that are broken up. So Ozark and Flint Hills, the 2 ones I'm going to focus on this event, this March 5th event. And Ozark has 3 high altitude sectors here in the middle, and then Flint Hills has 2 high altitude sectors. And there's a work group right now that they're looking at reorganizing some of these sectors in their airspace, but that's still in the works right now. But you can see Flint Hills 2 is a pretty big airspace compared to all these other ones. And so when you get diversions and things like that through that airspace, it really causes a pretty big impact to that controller working that airspace. So here's an example of that TCF verification. Again, it's an 8, 6, and a 4-hour forecast. This was issued at, this was issued at 18Z, valid for 2Z that night. And so you can see it has a little bit of sparse coverage, which is 25 to 39%. And then, the heights were only about 34,000 feet. You can see that's the 340. And, but you can see we missed a little bit of the southern edge there, and then kind of went a little bit further south at the 4-hour TCF. But we did have that big nub in there all the way down to like almost Joplin. So that's a good 100 miles, maybe 100, almost 125, 30 miles, something like that. That airspace that really just causes, the airspace to shrink and cause some significant diversion. So in this case, again, I was part of this forecast. So I was, completely, oblivious on how the impacts of the TCF is important to air traffic. So that was the reason why I was doing this case study. But there's no breaks in the line where it probably should have been like more medium coverage. The tops were over 40,000 feet. We were going maybe 34,000 feet, things like that. So it obviously should have been even extended further south towards Chaplin. So here's a radar loop on the right, and you can see it's going all the way down even into northeast Oklahoma. And so here's a screen capture of the flight aware. You can see it gets a little bit congested down there. Again, most of these are probably okay with the separation standards. It may look worse than it really is, but that's just two sectors there working a ton of aircraft and through a short amount of time. So ZKC, as far as the Ozark 30 here, we'll start with that. It's like the northern ones. Basically, it's like Columbia all the way to Kansas City. And so some of the map numbers here, this is a monitor alert parameter. So again, I mentioned earlier, they have certain numbers that aircraft count that, they get alerted for when it gets close to that count to where they need to do some maneuverability as far as aircraft to kind of mitigate the stress on that controller. And in this situation, it was okay for the first hour, but then it got right at the map. The last 45 minutes there even jumped up, one above the map. And again, so that controller is has to monitor and make sure that all these aircraft are going where they're supposed to be going, and the separation standards and all that kind of thing. So it gets a little bit more hairy with the Ozark 28. That's a little bit further south. That's covering southwest Missouri. And you can see the line of thunderstorms even is shrinking that airspace even more. So the northern part of that airspace. So it's just got to cover the southern half. And again, here's the map numbers and the aircraft count. So at 45Z, there was 27 aircraft in that within that airspace, within that 15-minute bends. So it's broken up to 15-minute bends. And so it's 11 over that MAP number, which is pretty dramatic and it's definitely not ideal for safety of those aircraft. So, but, for 45 minutes, they were well, above the map numbers, had a little bit of break, but then went above the map a little bit later for 30 minutes there. So, minutes exceeding the map, again, this is, just highlighting how much of that, those numbers were above the MAP. And, again, it was about 30 to 45 minutes of just, wall-to-wall air traffic control. So, and then further on down to Flint Hills 27, again, it's one of the bigger airspaces. And I won't hit on this a whole lot, but it kind of bounced up and down as far as the map numbers go for the aircraft count. And here's the PDARS data for the animation. Let's speed this up a little bit. Keep it going. And they'll sneak aircraft through any kind of hole of these lines until the last minute, like literally to the last minute. And you'll see this when it develops across western Missouri there over Kansas City. You can see they're still flying through it. And again, the outline in blue there is the TCF forecast, and that's the 4-hour forecast. So it's just there to kind of help verify as far as, how far north our forecast was too far north. So, and right here about the 1Z is when it really gets hairy. You can see how much aircraft is going through that airspace at one time. So, all right. So on to another event, April from last year. This is again another enhanced outlook for for portions of Iowa into even eastern Kansas, all the way down that location. Moderate risk up there in western Iowa. But again, similar setup. Deepening low across the plains, dragging that cold front through, causing a significant line of thunderstorms with that supercells along the warm front. On the TCF wide, we were actually pretty good, with the coverage, with medium coverage for the 8 and the 4 hour and the 6 hour. So, but again, we still had that little nubbin there south that didn't have any coverage. Even if we had sparse coverage, it probably would have helped. But again, that's about 100 miles there that really shrunk that airspace down and caused some significant diversions. And the other caveat is the convection down there in eastern Texas and up towards Arkansas there. So they really didn't want to put the transcons all the way down through Louisiana and then come back up. So the best route was right through Missouri into Oklahoma there. So here's the satellite image of that event. And again, if you want to take the shortest route without any kind of issues, and so that's going to be through again Missouri, down through southeast Kansas and into Oklahoma. So we'll focus on the PDARS data from Prairie, really actually sector 6, I believe, and that covers northwest Oklahoma, southwest Kansas. And again, this is going to be above 24,000. So any aircraft above 24,000, is in the PDARS data. So, and so starting off right off the bat, you're 12 above the map number for a good 30 minutes. Again, these are 15-minute bends. Pretty busy there. It's 32 aircraft that is in that airspace at one time that controller has to be, it has to be situationally aware as far as where they're going and providing them with service. And again, they're not going to be talking with all these aircraft, but they still have to be alert to, where and when they're going. So I had a little bit of a break, but then that last hour, almost hour and a half, was just, wall to wall again. I worked the derecho of 2020, and that was the busiest day as far as phone calls and chats and things like that. So that, I can't even imagine working that many aircraft for that long of a time frame. So just kind of put it in perspective. So and then the minutes above the map numbers, again, it may not seem like it was above for too long, but still you got all that aircraft in that sector for even a few minutes is going to cause some significant issues there. So here's the PDARS data, the animation from that event. It works better if it's sped up a little bit here. And I might play this twice because it's a really good one. Again, the outline here is the TCF forecast. And it really gets going right around, there's the first one at 03Z, and then it ramps up again right around 2Z, I believe. But again, Ozark, or Prairie number 2 was just getting significantly amount of aircraft through there at one time. So, and there's a couple of aircraft that go all the way up to Minneapolis, or come down to Minneapolis, come down and go back up to maybe Chicago or something like that. So it was pretty cool how they worked that. So, and this is an event that I just uploaded the other day, this past weekend. It's called the Knox Royco. Basically a bad word within ZKC, because it causes some significant issues for air traffic for approach to Chicago and departures. Basically, if it's cutting, there's thunderstorms cutting off the approaches to Chicago from central Illinois up into Indiana. It's going to put all the air traffic from like the East Coast, Florida, Atlanta, up through Missouri and into northeast, into central Illinois. So it can cause a significant impact to air traffic. And this was early in the morning. This was actually, this loop starts at like 5Z at night, so I'm going to speed this up. But this is a good example of, there's not a whole lot of air traffic during the overnight hours. It starts about midnight. And let me move it up a little bit faster here. But right around like 11Z is when it really starts to ramp up. And Gateway 14, sector 14 is the southeast portions of our airspace. That one is really the one that gets focused, gets hammered with the aircraft. But the TCF was pretty well forecast, and so it was cutting off all the air travel and pushing it all the way up through Missouri. And so they had to kind of spread out some of the approaches. I think one of the approach was going all the way out towards Springfield and then turning northeast. So let's see here. So there's 11Z. So there really gets going. It's kind of like stepping on an anthill, just getting those ants scurried about. And again, this is just air traffic above 24,000. I can't imagine what's below it. But in the different colors mean different things, and I'm not going to try and get into that. That's not really the importance of this at the moment. But another event too. There was another event for this day during the afternoon across the northern portions of our airspace from Iowa into northeast Kansas. So this is just a very busy day weather-wise. So you can see the TCF starts to show up across the north there, and so that was another thing that we had to kind of plan. And you can see the departures and approaches going into Chicago there. Just trying to keep it organized as best as possible. So, all right, I think this was a good long. This will be in the. This is on YouTube, so you can always come back to it and play it. So, and then let's see. Let's go to the next one here. So, looking at some of the map numbers from that event. Nothing really significantly above the map but it was above the map for several hours. I mean, there's a little bit of a break there around 14Z, but basically from 11Z to 18Z, it was very, very busy for that airspace. And so they need to plan for staffing wise on that situation, because the controllers aren't supposed to be on. They're actually required not to be on for more than 2 hours, and so they got to take breaks. And so they got to plan for that. But when you have all the sectors open within an area, you got to really plan for staffing on that situation. So, and then my last case here was from April 19th from last month. This was Flint Hill Sector 2 again, and I was working the late evening events, and I believe it was an enhanced outlook across portions of northern Kansas into Iowa. And what was really under forecast was this stuff down here in Oklahoma. I believe there was actually a tornado that impacted portions of Oklahoma City. But I was watching this gap here. So all the air traffic was going through southeast Kansas. And, I was watching this gap, and I even put in the mesoanalysis chat. I was like, hey, what do you think about this gap closing? And sure enough, it was closing up. It only closed up for a little bit, but it was enough to cause a little bit of a concern as far as the controllers go. Luckily, the stuff opened up a little bit more down in northeast Oklahoma, so it can cause too big of an impact. They can just route them further south. But looking at the PDARS data from this event, this is the kind of a zoomed out event. Let's see here. All right. And, you can see down here that the TCF in Oklahoma wasn't, again, that was kind of over the thunderstorms overperformed down in that area. So we didn't do a very good job of forecasting that location. So that may have impacted some of the playbooks that were already in place. But you can see the congestion starting to get going. Everything's pushing north and south right and through that airspace. And so it was, really concerned. So I was providing Team U and the OM on staff, hey, this is closing up. Luckily it only closed up for just a short amount of time, and it didn't cause too much of an impact. Well, more of an impact than what it already was. So, and then looking at the closer data here. Again, this is Flint Hills. This is really where it shows all the aircraft just getting scrunched right over that airspace, and I believe I have the map numbers on this. I'll show that here in a second. But the time is on the top left. If I can get, there we go. was a late evening event. So right around 3Z, 2-3Z, it started getting going. And really what helped me on this event, if anybody has used the product Lightning Cast, it gave me a good 30 to maybe 45-minute lead time on this closing up, because it would have had some of the probabilities closing together. I don't have the example with me, but I did save some of the screen captures. But it was pretty impressive to see that show that gap closing. So let's see here. All right. No, so I don't have anything else. So some future work for my, I have tons more cases that I got to review. In my STMC contact, Mark Marion, he's got a new program that FAA has just produced, and so I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm probably gonna maybe play with it this weekend. And then I'd like to expand out to other CWSUs airspace and see about looking at some of the PDARS data from their airspaces, or even the entire NAS. That would be pretty phenomenal to see. So that is all I got. I just want to thank some of these folks that really helped me out with this presentation. Hopefully it didn't take too long, but.
Well, thank you, Kenny. That was a great overview of the Kansas City CWSU.